So when we speak about China's maritime rise, we also must talk about the threat that China brings in the South China Sea to all the nations around there. What is the threat according to you? So how big is the threat?
Yeah, so it is definitely an issue. China has changed the geography of the region also by the artificial island construction. They built, the Spratlys. They have got three large airfields which have been built, four large helipads which have been built. So seven sort of structures that you have made, and these are enormous. I mean, you've reclaimed 3,200 acres of land you've created, out of reefs. And these facilities are robust. I mean, you're talking about 3,000-meter runways, which can, fighter capable, with can deploy frontline aircraft with defenses of every nature. And then, you create this nine dash line, geopolitical statement that you've pushed out. And even when it is challenged in court, and the court gives a ruling, international court, it gives you the PCA, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, gives a ruling that this is incorrect, and China is a signatory of UNCLOS. You junk that judgment, and you say our claims predate any judgment that is given in this respect. It is an iterative change that they're making all the time. So this whole philosophy of China, what they call salami slicing, is what the Western use, or three steps forward, two steps back. Every time you create a crisis, or if a crisis emerges, you create a new status quo which is always more in your favor than the last it was. So there's an iterative change that is happening all the time. But it's all driven by a growing ability to project power. As you're becoming more and more powerful, your ability to project power further and further from your coastline is increasing all the time. And therefore, you find that there's a fundamental change that is coming in this area. There is a pushback. It'll be interesting to see how this pushback sort of manifests itself. You're seeing collisions between Philippine Coast Guard vessels and Chinese vessels. I think over the last 10 days, there have been two collisions already. So you're reaching, I would say, an inflection point where one way or the other, either there has to be a clearer understanding, or, the probability of a chance conflict can only increase with time. Yeah.
It's not just the South China Sea that they're gaining influence, they're also gaining influence in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
How is India countering that influence according to you, sir?
As China's navy becomes bigger and they start building bigger and bigger ships, their influence globally will increase. What really brings them to the Indian Ocean, if you ask me, is that so far the so called global policeman, from a maritime sense, has been the United States Navy, right?
Yeah.
They were the dominant power, and they were able to intervene anywhere globally. And they were sort of used to underwrite, I would say, maritime security in a global context. And all nations used to depend on this sort of security being provided by the US Navy and its allies. Now, insofar as China is concerned, that relationship has broken down. And they can no longer rely on the US Navy to protect their trade and things like that. Fundamentally, they feel forced to come over here to address a growing weakness that is developed, and also to gain influence, also to their interaction. So there are many reasons why they're coming. One is, of course, trade protection. They have got large investments in Africa, in all of South Asia as well. They have got a large diaspora, which at times needs to be sort of protected. If you're a large trading nation, you've got investments, you've got requirement for resources, you've got requirements for places to sell your products, and therefore, apart from trade, you require that access. You require influence. Influence is always, I would say, zero sum. If someone has to gain influence, someone has to lose influence. Particularly in Africa, I would say the influence is ramping up quite significantly,
Yeah.
and so in West Asia. So these are all the drivers that are bringing them here. From our perspective, whatever be the drivers to bring them here, the fact is that it impacts us. If their ships are here in large numbers, so far we are seeing on an average of around 5 to 6 ships here at any given time.
Yeah.
Largely 3 as part of the anti-piracy squadron, and then they turn around, and then the ships generally hang around for some time over here before they go back. Sometimes they have other requirements when ships come over here. So 6 to 7 ships would be quite the norm of grey hulls. Apart from that, you have the survey and research ships, which are constantly here undertaking some marine acoustic surveys over here, either for oil prospecting or for, but this information is all dual use. It can be utilized for enhancing your information on effective submarine operations also. There are many things that we can do, but as they come over here in larger numbers, we have to change the way our Navy sort of thinks and functions, because so far we have been quietly, we've not had a major adversary in the Indian Ocean. And therefore, we've developed as a navy which has largely been capability based. That you want capabilities on anti-submarine, on anti-air, on carriers, on expeditionary operations. But if you have a new player who's coming who is impacting your security, then I think your philosophy has to change to a more threat based approach now. So you counter certain specific aspects of the threats that he can put on you instead of a capability based
True,
approach.
true.
And I think that change, to my mind, has to take place. And what will be the dimensions of that change can be quite sort of profound. The second issue I would say is that you have to start looking at asymmetric options. Take our defense budget. If you take, I'm talking about say 2003, 2004 figures, because that's for China. We have only those figures. Our Navy capital budget was to the tune of around just short of 60,000 crores. Yeah, so you're talking about maybe around $6 billion. Yeah, I don't know, around 52,000 crores, if I'm not mistaken. China's budget, if you take the defense budget for 2003 to 2004, was 1.55 trillion yuan, which comes to $220 billion. But if you take CIPRI, if you take IISS, they all say that China underreports, so they mark it up by another 50%, so it's $330 billion. In that, what share goes to the Navy? But let's assume between 25 to 30%, so between 80 to $100 billion to the Navy. China's capital spending is high, in excess of 50%. So you're talking about 50, $60 billion. Looking at capital spending of $6.5 billion to around 50 to $60 billion. Naval spending around 10 times. And then you're looking at, their ability to convert capital into resources, as we discussed earlier, is much higher. So their ability to bring force, if you're going to go force versus force, or you're going to go, you're going to match them asset for asset, is going to be extremely difficult. You will not be able to do it. So you have to look at asymmetric options. You're looking at forces, what is happening in Iran, what is happening in Ukraine, where asymmetric options have also been useful. So I'm not saying this transition has to be done in one shot or suddenly, but the drift has to be in that direction. That you look at low cost options with the possibility for high effects and leverage geography. If he's coming here, he's at 4,000 miles away from his bases here. Because geography is complicated. Our geography with China is quite unique. We share a common border, but from a maritime standpoint, you're 4,000 miles apart. They has to come through one of the straits, has to get through the first island chain, the second island chain, come through one of the Indonesian straits, and then come over here. So he's on extended lines, and you're on short lines. So use these to your advantage, so that you present a credible threat at all times. So that's what I would say.
And we need to strengthen our relationship as well in the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah, so certainly, what you do yourself is one side of the story. And the second side is always this element of external balancing. So the more, you always will have certain capability gaps. While you resort to external balancing, I think you have to remember, in the absence of an alliance structure, what external balancing can achieve will always be limited. And we have to be conscious of those limitations. So there should not be over-reliance, on external partners. Because if you don't have an alliance, there's only so much you can do.
Diary of a publisher. Here we don't just talk, we explore, question, and push beyond the ordinary. And if you're ready to see things from a fresh perspective, you're at the right place. Make sure to subscribe. We're just scratching the surface, and the next conversation might just change how you see the world.